Bienvenue sur ma chaîne
Développement personnel,
par la parole de Dieu.
que sa lumière vous accompagne.
Soyez bénis où que vous soyez.
Likez, partagez, restez connectés.
Ici on grandit, on s'élève,
On est transformé.
When God calls us out of the shadows, there is a massive, widespread misconception that people carry with them when they watch someone speak with unshakable authority. Whether that person is commanding a massive stage, standing behind a pulpit in a church, leading a high-stakes boardroom meeting, or simply looking directly into a camera lens, we so easily fall into the trap of assuming that they were just born to do this. We imagine that they have always felt this comfortable in their own skin. We assume that absolute self-confidence is just hardwired into their DNA, and that standing up to speak has always been as effortless for them as breathing. But the unvarnished truth behind the curtain is usually a completely different story. Behind almost every powerful speaker you see today, there is a hidden history, a grueling, deeply personal internal journey, a path paved with intense periods of self-doubt, relentless questioning, and more often than not, visceral, paralyzing fear. Because let's be honest, speaking up, expressing your true self, and publicly sharing your deepest convictions and thoughts is absolutely not a walk in the park for everyone. While some individuals are naturally wired to be outwardly expressive, thriving in the spotlight and feeding off the energy of a crowd, others are inherently more guarded. They possess a nature that is profoundly introspective and beautifully quiet. These are the people who observe everything around them with a sharp eye. They are the deep, meticulous processors. Yet they are also the ones who constantly hesitate to expose their inner world to the heavy, evaluating gaze of others. If you recognize yourself in that description, if you're someone who is terrified at the mere thought of taking the floor, if you constantly wrestle with imposter syndrome and doubt your own legitimacy, if you lay awake at night wondering if your voice actually holds any real value, then I can promise you, this video was made specifically for you. Because there often comes a pivotal, undeniable season in life where God begins to gently, yet relentlessly, push us straight out of the safety of our comfort zones. It's that distinct moment when you feel a deep, unshakable calling echoing in your spirit. A calling to finally share your story, to bear witness to what you've seen, to boldly pass on the specific message that God has carefully planted inside your heart. But as you may already know, this divine calling almost always sparks a fierce internal war. It's a brutal tug of war between two opposing forces. On one side, you have the heavy anchors of human limitation, pure fear, crippling shyness, overwhelming doubt, and on the exact opposite side, the burning, undeniable conviction that God is commanding you to step forward anyway. And that exact tension is precisely what we're going to unpack today. In this video, I am going to share a deeply personal, yet universally profound reflection on one monumental question. How do you actually overcome the fear of speaking up when God is the one calling you out of the shadows? To truly grasp the answer to this, we are going to explore the issue through a multidimensional lens. We are going to dive into the realms of modern psychology, explore the fascinating discoveries of neuroscience, and most importantly, anchor it all in unshakable faith and biblical truth. Because while science does a phenomenal job of explaining the biological mechanics of our fear, it is our faith that gives us the ultimate blueprint on how to conquer it. To make this journey as clear and impactful as possible, I have divided this video into 4 distinct chapters. Part 1. The root of the fear. We will unpack where the terror of public speaking actually comes from, and why so many deeply intelligent, highly sensitive individuals are the ones who feel it the most. Part 2. The divine nudge. We will explore that highly specific, quiet moment when God begins calling us out of our protective shadows, even when we feel entirely unqualified and unready. Part 3. Redefining courage. We will dismantle the myth that courage means having no fear, and look at how science and faith perfectly align to teach us how to push past our biological panic. Part 4. The introvert's advantage. Finally, we will uncover a truly extraordinary biblical pattern. Why God so frequently bypasses the loud and charismatic to choose quiet, introverted people for his most crucial missions. So, if you have ever felt too shy, too reserved, or simply not confident enough to step into the calling you feel burning in your chest, I urge you to stay with me until the very end of this video. Because what you currently view as your greatest, most embarrassing weakness might actually be the very foundation of the most powerful instrument God will ever use in your life. Part 1. Unpacking the fear of public speaking. There is a fundamental truth that many people completely overlook when they watch someone command a room with absolute assurance. They easily fall into the trap of believing that this person was simply born with an innate, unshakable confidence. They imagine that a select few are just naturally hardwired to speak, teach, and lead, while the rest of us are somehow destined to quietly fade into the background and remain in the shadows. But the reality of the situation is far more nuanced and complex. Believe it or not, some of the very people you see today speaking with undeniable power, deep conviction, and crystal clarity were once the exact same individuals who were absolutely terrified at the mere thought of taking the floor. Let me be completely transparent with you. For the longest time, I was an incredibly guarded and reserved person. And let me be clear, it wasn't for a lack of things to say, or because I didn't have valuable insights to share. Rather, it was because I wrestled constantly with that familiar internal tug-of-war that so many introverts know all too well, that agonizing moment when a profound thought crosses your mind, yet your heart begins to race out of your chest at the very idea of voicing it out loud. It's that overwhelming sensation where your mind goes into overdrive, overanalyzing every single variable. What if I completely miss the mark? What if the audience sits in judgment of me? What if I stumble and just can't find the right words? What society so quickly brushes off as mere shyness isn't actually just a quirk of your personality. Modern science now clearly demonstrates that this reaction is deeply rooted in a very specific, hardwired neurological mechanism. Whenever we find ourselves thrust into a social situation where we are put under the microscope, watched, evaluated, or judged, much like speaking in front of a crowd, a tiny region of the brain, known as the amygdala, shifts into high gear. The amygdala is a key structure within our limbic system, essentially serving as the brain's internal alarm bell, detecting potential danger and triggering our innate stress responses. Fascinating studies in the realm of social neuroscience have revealed that for certain individuals, particularly those who lean toward introversion or possess high sensitivity, this specific brain region can go into overdrive when faced with social exposure. In these moments, your brain quite literally interprets the spotlight as a legitimate physical threat. Consequently, it unleashes a cascade of physiological responses. Your heart rate skyrockets, your breathing becomes dangerously shallow, and your previously clear thoughts suddenly spiral into a confusing fog. This phenomenon isn't just in your head. It is heavily documented across scientific literature and is formally known as social evaluation threat. To put it in layman's terms, your brain subconsciously perceives the gaze of others as a genuine, pressing danger. And that is precisely why so many brilliant, deeply intelligent, and wildly capable individuals suddenly find themselves frozen in their tracks when the time comes to speak up. Yet, there is a silver lining, something truly extraordinary hidden within this reality. Because while science does an incredible job of explaining the nuts and bolts of the mechanism of fear, faith steps in to reveal the ultimate truth about our identity. As the Bible beautifully states in 2 Timothy 1 verse 7, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." The power carried within this single verse is absolutely staggering. Notice that it doesn't brush off or deny the existence of fear. It simply shifts our perspective by revealing that this fear does not originate from God. And realizing that changes the entire game. Because if fear isn't authored by God, then it has absolutely no right to dictate or define who you are. Shyness and hesitation might be a very real part of your human experience. But make no mistake, they do not constitute your spiritual identity. This specific message carries a profound weight especially for introverts. We live in a society that loudly and disproportionately celebrates the extroverted ideal. We are constantly spoon-fed the narrative that in order to make a real impact, you must be naturally charismatic, endlessly outgoing, the loudest voice in the room, and totally dominant. However, when you take a closer look and read the Bible with a discerning eye, a beautiful pattern emerges. God consistently goes out of his way to choose the most unlikely candidates. Take Moses, for example. He was miles away from being a polished, confident public speaker. In Exodus 4 verse 10, he pleads with God, saying, "O Lord, I have never been eloquent. I am slow of speech and tongue." To put it bluntly, Moses was literally looking God in the eye and saying, "You've got the wrong guy. I am absolutely not cut out for this." But God's response to this excuse is nothing short of fascinating. In Exodus 4 verses 11 to 12, the Lord fires back. "Who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will help you speak and will teach you what to say." This exchange shines a spotlight on a profound spiritual principle. God isn't scouring the earth for people who are overflowing with natural self-confidence. He is looking for people who are simply available and willing. Because whenever God calls someone to step out of the shadows and into the light, that calling is never, ever anchored in human capability. It is entirely founded upon divine grace. And this truth carries an extraordinarily liberating message for you today. Your fear does not disqualify you from your calling. As a matter of fact, in many instances, that very fear is the biggest indicator that you are on the right path. Because the moment God invites us to step into a purpose that is vastly bigger than ourselves, our immediate, knee-jerk human reaction is almost always exactly that, pure fear. And that right there is the exact starting line for the journey of courage. But let's get one thing straight. Biblical courage looks absolutely nothing like the world's definition of courage. The world will try to sell you the lie that courage means being completely fearless. The Bible paints an entirely different picture. True courage isn't the absence of fear. It is the sheer grit to keep moving forward despite the fear, leaning entirely and unconditionally on the strength that God provides. And that is precisely what we're going to unpack in the rest of this video. Because stepping out of your comfort zone isn't about faking it or transforming into someone you're not. It's about learning to walk boldly in the mission God has entrusted to you, even when your voice shakes and your heart trembles. Part 2, the moment God calls us out of the shadows. There is a highly specific, defining moment in every spiritual journey, a moment that is incredibly discreet, a moment that arrives almost in total silence, and yet it is a moment that changes absolutely everything. It is that precise instant when God begins to call us to step out of the shadows and into the light. More often than not, this defining moment looks absolutely nothing like what we've been conditioned to expect. It isn't always some grandiose, spectacular revelation that stops you in your tracks. It isn't necessarily a booming, audible voice echoing from the heavens. Most of the time, it comes in a form that is far more subtle and intimate. It's a quiet, unshakable inner conviction, a persistent thought that keeps knocking at the door of your mind again and again, an overwhelming, lingering sense that God is gently but firmly nudging you in a specific direction, a direction you would have never, in a million years, chosen for yourself. And for the vast majority of introverts, this direction points exactly to the one thing that terrifies them the most: speaking up, sharing their soul, explaining their truth, bearing witness, talking boldly about God, vocalizing the deep things they have lived and experienced. I remember the exact moment I started feeling this profound shift within myself. There was this relentless, recurring idea brewing inside my spirit. Share your story. Speak your truth. Pass on what you know. And if I am being completely honest, my initial reaction was absolutely not one of burning enthusiasm. My knee-jerk reaction was practically identical to the one Moses had. It was a deep-rooted, stubborn internal resistance. Why me? There are so many people out there who are infinitely more articulate. So many people who ooze natural confidence. So many people who effortlessly command a stage and play with words. Fascinatingly enough, this exact type of internal pushback is something heavily documented in modern psychology. Extensive research in social psychology reveals a compelling truth. Individuals who think deeply, who analyze their surroundings, and who possess a high degree of introspection are actually the most prone to severely underestimating their own potential for impact. This psychological friction is frequently linked to what we call imposter syndrome, a phenomenon extensively studied ever since the groundbreaking work of psychologists Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes in the late 1970s. It perfectly describes people who are undeniably competent, highly intelligent, and deeply capable, yet who walk around with a nagging, internalized feeling that they are somehow frauds, completely devoid of any real legitimacy. And the second God calls someone to step out of their comfortable shadows, these crippling thoughts don't just disappear. They often grow 10 times louder. Why? Because a divine calling almost always requires us to step far outside the protective walls of our psychological comfort zones. But there is something breathtakingly beautiful about the way God operates. More often than not, God deliberately bypasses the people who are brimming with self-assurance. Instead, he handpicks the ones who are acutely aware of their own brokenness and their desperate need for him. This is exactly why the Apostle Paul penned those immortal words in 2 Corinthians 12:9. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. To put it another way, God doesn't do his best work in spite of our weaknesses and insecurities. He does his greatest work through them. The moment that profound truth finally clicked for me, my entire paradigm shifted. I suddenly realized that the million-dollar question wasn't, am I naturally gifted and comfortable enough to speak in public? The only question that actually mattered was, am I willing to simply be obedient? And that subtle difference changes the entire equation. Because when you look at the Bible, the most earth-shattering spiritual movements almost never begin with people who are perfectly polished and ready. They begin with people who are simply available. Abraham stepped out into the unknown without a map or a destination. Moses was convinced he lacked the eloquence to speak to Pharaoh. Jeremiah tried to disqualify himself by saying he was just a child. Gideon looked in the mirror and saw nothing but an insignificant nobody. But God never once demanded perfection from a single one of them. All he ever asked for was their trust. Very often, the very first step God asks us to take is the one that makes our skin crawl with discomfort. Stepping out of the safety of the shadows. Saying out loud the very things we've been hoarding in our hearts. Sharing the hard-fought wisdom that God has poured into us. Because the tragic reality is that hidden away in the silence of the shadows, countless people completely miss out on the incredible potential God planted inside them. And it's never because they lack the raw ability. It is entirely because they were paralyzed by fear. Fear of the crowd's judging eyes. Fear of being entirely misunderstood. Fear of falling short and not measuring up to an imaginary standard. Yet you must understand this. When God calls you out of the dark, his goal is never to expose you to ridicule. His ultimate goal is to use you to illuminate the path for others. This is precisely the core message Jesus delivers in Matthew 5:14-16. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. The revelation hidden within this passage is deeply profound. Light was never designed to be kept a secret. And sometimes the very thing we are so quick to label as our shyness is in reality nothing more than a powerful inner light that simply hasn't yet found the courage to shine. When God begins to call us out of our quiet background, it is never about puffing up our ego or bringing us personal glory. It is about clearing the way so that his radiant light can shine directly through our cracks. And that exact moment, the moment you finally decide to stop running and simply listen to that call, marks the undisputed beginning of a massive internal transformation. A transformation that absolutely does not require you to fake being a loud extrovert, but rather a transformation that turns you into someone deeply and undeniably courageous. And that is exactly what we are going to explore in the next section. how spiritual grit and true courage are built, even when your hands are shaking and the fear is still standing right there next to you. Part 3. True courage is not the absence of fear. There is a deeply entrenched narrative in our modern society, an idea that on the surface seems perfectly logical. But when you peel back the layers, is actually a complete and utter fallacy. It's the pervasive myth that truly courageous people are simply immune to fear. We look at those who speak with unshakable authority, who take massive leaps of faith, who boldly step into the public arena, and we falsely assume that they are somehow superhuman, completely devoid of anxiety or hesitation. But the reality behind the curtain is drastically different. Courage is absolutely not the absence of fear. True courage is the conscious, active decision to keep moving forward despite being terrified. The neuroscience of the threat, interestingly enough, hard science backs this up completely. In the realm of neuroscience, fear is understood as a perfectly normal, deeply ingrained biological reaction engineered by our brains. Whenever we are confronted with a situation that is novel, highly uncertain, or leaves us open to the evaluation of others, such as stepping up to a microphone to speak in public, our brain instantly triggers a massive stress response. As we touched upon earlier, the amygdala, which acts as a tiny alarm bell deep within our limbic system, serves as our body's highly sensitive danger detector. The split second it senses vulnerability, it fires off rapid signals that ignite the famous fight or flight response. This is an ancient, evolutionary survival mechanism originally designed to keep early humans alive in the face of very real, physical predators. The problem? Today, this exact same primal alarm system frequently gets tripped by situations that pose absolutely no actual threat to our physical survival. Situations like speaking up in a crowded room, voicing a contrary opinion, feeling the heavy gaze of an audience resting upon you. In these intensely vulnerable moments, your brain essentially short circuits, acting as if your actual life is on the line. And that is precisely why so many people experience those visceral, physiological reactions. Hands that shake uncontrollably, a throat that goes completely dry, a racing mind where thoughts blur into an incomprehensible mess, rewiring the brain. The power of neuroplasticity, but here is where an incredibly fascinating discovery in psychology and neuroscience comes into play. The human brain possesses a miraculous ability known as neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity simply means that your brain is not hardwired in stone. It is incredibly malleable. It has the extraordinary ability to literally reconfigure its own neural pathways and learn to react completely differently over time and through lived experience. To put it simply, the very thing that absolutely terrifies you today can become second nature to you tomorrow. Countless studies in behavioral psychology have definitively proven that the most effective way to conquer a fear is not to run away and avoid it. It is to systematically and progressively expose yourself to it. This is a clinical concept psychologists refer to as gradual exposure. Every single time you bravely face a situation that makes your heart pound, you are feeding your brain brand new data. You are essentially teaching it, look, I am still standing. I am safe. Step by step, exposure by exposure, the raw intensity of that primal reaction begins to fade. This is the exact foundational principle used in modern therapies to effectively treat severe phobias and crippling social anxiety. The spiritual shift, but what makes this truly breathtaking is how perfectly the scientific principle mirrors a profound spiritual truth. When you read through the Bible, you will quickly notice a glaring pattern. God almost never asks people to sit around and wait for their fear to magically evaporate before taking action. Quite the opposite. God frequently commands his people to start marching forward while their knees are still knocking together in fear. Look at Joshua 1 verse 9, where God issues a powerful directive, have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Pay close attention to the phrasing of this verse. It is incredibly telling. God doesn't say, wait until you no longer feel afraid. He says, be strong and take courage. Courage, therefore, is an active choice. A choice that does not rely solely on our own fragile human willpower, but rather a choice firmly anchored in our unwavering trust in God. And this is exactly where faith completely revolutionizes our relationship with fear. Because faith fundamentally changes the question we ask ourselves. When we operate without faith, we are constantly plagued by the question, am I truly capable of doing this? But the moment faith enters the equation, the question transforms into, is God walking beside me in this? And that subtle shift in perspective changes absolutely everything. Because the moment we deeply internalize the belief that God is accompanying us in every step we take, that fear is instantly stripped of its paralyzing power. Now, this doesn't mean the feeling of fear vanishes into thin air overnight, but it does mean that fear no longer gets to sit in the driver's seat. It no longer has the final say. 3 pillars to overcoming fear in a highly practical sense. Pushing past this fear generally requires 3 very concrete, actionable things. Crystal clear clarity of mission. When your why is big enough, the fear becomes small. Think of a brilliant surgeon right before a high-stakes, complex operation. They might feel a wave of fear and pressure, but their mission, saving a human life, infinitely outweighs their personal anxiety. In that exact same vein, the moment you realize that your voice, your story, and your testimony have the power to help someone, to deeply encourage a broken heart, or to bring light into someone's dark situation, your personal fear takes a backseat. It becomes entirely secondary. The power of repetition. Every single time you take one bold step outside the borders of your comfort zone, you are actively teaching your brain a new reality. The first few attempts are always going to feel like climbing a mountain. They are undoubtedly the hardest. But over time, through sheer repetition, what once felt absolutely impossible simply becomes your new normal. Radical dependence on God. Ultimately, true spiritual grit isn't just about white-knuckling it or relying on strict mental discipline. It is birthed directly from a deep, abiding relationship with God. In Philippians 4 verse 13, the Apostle Paul pens these iconic words, I can do all this through him who gives me strength. Make no mistake, this verse is not some cheap, magical incantation. It is a profound, radical declaration of complete dependence. Paul doesn't boldly claim, I can do all things because I am so incredibly strong and capable. He declares, I can do all things through the one who pours his strength into me. And that, at its core, is the true definition of spiritual courage. It is never about the absence of fear. It is the resolute, unwavering decision to keep putting one foot in front of the other. That fully knowing, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that you are never walking alone. Part 4. Why God uniquely calls the introvert. When you take a magnifying glass to the pages of the Bible, a truly fascinating pattern begins to emerge. God seems to have a wildly surprising, almost counterintuitive, hiring policy. Time and time again, he deliberately bypasses the exact candidates the world would naturally put on a pedestal. He doesn't necessarily look for the most dazzling or impressive resumes. He doesn't seek out the loudest, most commanding voice in the room. He doesn't default to those who are naturally oozing with bulletproof self-assurance. Instead, he has a profound track record of selecting the humble, the quiet ones, the reserved, the individuals who are acutely, sometimes painfully, aware of their own limitations and shortcomings. And let me tell you, this is no cosmic accident. It is entirely by design. Because introverts naturally harbor incredibly potent, yet often hidden, spiritual superpowers. Introverts are deep, meticulous thinkers. They are world-class observers who absorb the subtle details everyone else breezes right past. They listen with profound, undivided intent. They may speak far less frequently, but when they finally do open their mouths, their words carry a completely different weight. Their sentences are measured, deeply intentional, and heavily saturated with raw sincerity. In a modern era that is drowning in a relentless sea of noise, knee-jerk reactions, and utterly superficial chatter, these quiet, grounded qualities have become rarer and more valuable than gold. Just look at how the book of Proverbs frames this in chapter 17, verse 27. The one who has knowledge uses words with restraint, and whoever has understanding is even-tempered. Read between the lines there. Holding your tongue and being reserved is not a symptom of weakness or insecurity. It is the ultimate hallmark of profound wisdom. But there comes an inevitable tipping point in every believer's life where that internal wisdom must transform into an outward testimony. Because the profound truths and experiences God has buried deep within your heart were never meant to be kept under lock and key. As 1 Peter 4 verse 10 beautifully commands, each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. That single verse unlocks a monumental truth. The unique gifts, insights, and breakthroughs God has entrusted to you are not just for your own personal spiritual consumption. They are explicitly designed to be poured out for the benefit of others. And sometimes, what you quickly dismiss as just another messy chapter of your personal journey is the exact blueprint someone else desperately needs to survive theirs. Your story has the power to pull someone out of a spiral of despair. Your hard-fought testimony can breathe life back into shattered hopes. Your carefully chosen words can serve as a lighthouse for someone currently navigating a pitch-black season. But absolutely none of that magic can happen unless you make the terrifying decision to step out of the shadows. And we both know that this is exactly where the fiercest internal battles are fought. Because stepping into the light means making yourself incredibly vulnerable. It means accepting that you will be seen. It means risking being heard. And yes, it means making peace with the fact that sometimes you will be completely misunderstood. Yet, the unvarnished truth is that every single person who has ever left a lasting mark on this world had to stand at this exact crossroads. It is the defining moment where you are forced to choose between two wildly different paths, your comfort or your calling, the safety of silence or the power of your testimony, playing it safe or stepping into radical obedience. And those in the Bible who dared to choose the mission discovered a mind-bending reality. When you blindly step out into the unknown waters God is calling you to walk on, He supernaturally supplies the strength you previously lacked. We see this sequence play out time and time again in Scripture. Look at Isaiah 41 verse 10, where God promises, "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." Pay very close attention to the timeline there. God does not say, get yourself strong, confident, and fearless first, and then step out. He says, step out, and I will be the one to fortify you. This is exactly why so many believers only ever discover their true, God-given grit after they take that terrifying first step. Never before. So, if you are naturally introverted, if you are the kind of person who would much rather observe from the sidelines than command the center stage, if you are an overthinker, if you are someone who constantly wrestles with imposter syndrome and doubts your own legitimacy, I need you to hear this loud and clear today. Your personality is not a roadblock to God's plan. It is a finely tuned instrument perfectly placed in His hands. Because God isn't scouring the earth for flawless, highly charismatic personalities. He is hunting for surrendered, available hearts. And sometimes the most earth-shaking, atmosphere-shifting voices aren't the ones screaming the loudest into a microphone. They are the quiet ones speaking with unwavering truth, breathtaking depth, and raw authenticity. So when God taps you on the shoulder and asks you to step out of the shadows, do not let fear hold the pen that writes your story. Just anchor yourself to this one undeniable truth. Courage is not the magical absence of fear. Courage is simply deciding to trust God a little bit more than you trust your fear. And sometimes, simply whispering a shaky yes to that terrifying call has the power to not only radically rewire your own life, but to alter the destinies of countless others. As we draw this video to a close, I want to leave you with one final, lingering thought. It's a beautifully simple concept, yet it holds the power to completely revolutionize the way you view your own voice. Far too many people spend the vast majority of their lives firmly believing the lie that their voice simply doesn't matter. They fall into the endless trap of comparison, convincing themselves that others are infinitely more articulate, that others can explain things with more clarity, that others are just naturally more charismatic, more persuasive, and somehow more legitimate. And so, they resign themselves to the sidelines. They watch, they listen, they absorb, but they keep their most profound, deeply held reflections locked away in silence. Yet, when you look closely at how God actually operates, there is a breathtakingly beautiful pattern. God almost never orchestrates his greatest works through the individuals the world deems the most impressive. Time and time again, he chooses to move powerfully through completely ordinary people. People who battle crippling doubts. People who hesitate and second-guess themselves. But crucially, people who, despite all of that internal friction, find the courage to say, "Lord, if this is truly you calling me, then I will take the step." And more often than not, it is exactly those terrifying moments of blind obedience that swing open the most unimaginable, unexpected doors. Because here is the unvarnished truth. When someone shares their heart with raw sincerity, deep authenticity, and genuine faith, it pierces through the noise and touches people's souls in a way that perfectly polished, rehearsed speeches simply cannot replicate. If you look at the Bible, the most earth-shattering spiritual transformations didn't stem from highly sophisticated, intellectual rhetoric. They were born out of simple, messy, lived testimonies. That is exactly why you must never, ever underestimate what God is capable of doing through you. Your personal story might feel entirely unremarkable to you. Your voice might feel incredibly fragile, shaking as you speak. You might still be wrestling with heavy waves of doubt and fear. But listen to me. God is not sitting around waiting for you to achieve a state of flawless perfection before he can begin to move. He is simply waiting for your willing availability. Because the moment a person bravely offers up exactly who they are, complete with all their limitations, flaws, and imperfections, God takes that offering and multiplies it into something that vastly exceeds anything they could have ever dreamed up on their own. And perhaps, even right now as you sit there watching this video, you can feel a gentle, familiar tug somewhere deep inside your heart. That quiet, persistent conviction whispering that you, too, have a piece of your journey to share. That you have something vital to say. Something powerful to pass on to the next person. If that is the case, I am begging you, do not let fear suffocate that voice. Just remind yourself that every single person who speaks with unshakable confidence today once had to face the absolute terror of taking that exact same first step. A step that felt incredibly awkward and uncomfortable. A step that demanded a radical leap of faith. But ultimately, a step that paved the way for a completely new path. And sometimes that one seemingly insignificant first step marks the beginning of an extraordinary adventure, one that God will use to bless far more people than you could ever possibly fathom. So, if this message has breathed courage into your spirit, if this deep dive has resonated with the season you are currently in, or if you know someone else who is silently battling the fear of speaking up and drowning in self-doubt, please don't keep this to yourself. Share this video with them. And if you value this kind of content where we intersect personal growth with the timeless wisdom of God's word, I would be honored to have you support this channel. Subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on our upcoming videos. Drop a like to let me know this message hit home for you. And please, take a moment to write a comment down below. I would love to read your thoughts, your personal takeaways, or even suggestions for topics you'd like us to tackle next. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. And please, always carry this one truth with you. God doesn't need a flawless voice. He simply needs an available one. Stay immensely blessed. And I will see you very soon in the next video.